May 2001. We're at the National Guard Armory in Jamaica. We're interviewing Mr. John Favicchio, and I'm the interviewer. My name is Wayne Clark. Mr. Favicchio, tell me about when you were born and raised.
Okay. I was born in Long Island City on November the 20th, 1917. And after that, about at the age of 6, we moved to Astoria on 46th Street, where we lived for many years until the war, I guess. And
tell me a little bit about your family. What was your father and mother's name?
well, my mother's name was. Could you imagine? I could only remember her last name, Kuko. Isn't it funny? I can't. We never called her by. Oh, of course, Frances.
Okay.
And we never we'd call her Mom, and so forth. My father, Pasquale, he worked for the city. Well, first he was a laborer. He worked for the trolley track. He cleaned the trolley tracks when he came from the old country, and then eventually he worked for the city. And he bought a house on 46th Street after we moved from Long Island City. And I remember it was $6,000 or $7,000 for a two-family shingle house, wooden shingle house, on 46th Street. And then, of course, over the years, he improved it. It was coal water, of course, and wood-burning stove, and we remember the Christmases where we would hang the stockings over the over the stove, and we'd get the chestnuts and walnuts, and I remember those little things,
Any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have 2 brothers and 1 sister. The 2 brothers served in the Army. They're both deceased now, and my sister is still alive. She's just turned 80, and her husband died about 5 years ago.
And did you complete high school?
No, I went only a year and a half, but later on I took what they call the equivalency test. I got a diploma finally. I forget what. Oh, maybe it was in '67 or I forget what. But anyway, I did get it, and I felt nice about it. Getting an equivalency test diploma.
Now, do you remember what you were doing when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor?
No, December the 7th. No, I don't recall what I was doing. Don't recall that at all. That would be what, 1941, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, let me see. Yes, I was in a theater. I was working, not working. I was with the theater group in the Davenport Free Theater on 27th Street in Lexington Avenue. Oh, as a matter of fact, I should give him a plug. It was the first free theater in the country, established by Butler Davenport in 1923. He opened the theater, the first free theater in the country. I know it was in New York State, but in the country. And he was formerly a Broadway actor and playwright, so he came with a good reputation. He formed this theater. It was a free theater, and he eventually got his license, tax-free exemption from then Mayor LaGuardia. Yeah.
Now, were you doing?
Yeah, I was acting. I was very interested. I was about 18 then, or 17. My cousin got me interested. Well, although I was always a ham actor in my teens, and acting. And so what we did all kinds of plays, classical plays. And as a matter of fact, I got a good education because it taught me to read. And he was this Davenport. I gave him credit. He encouraged me to read. He says, "Look, if you start reading 15 minutes a day, you'll be surprised. In time, it will grow," and it did. It opened up a great horizon for me. And so I was in the theater when the Pearl Harbor incident took place, or the sneak attack, I should say, not incident.
Now, when did you enter the service?
Oh, I entered the service in March 43, and I was discharged in June 46.
Okay. Now, where did you go for basic training?
At Camp Grant, Illinois. Camp Grant, Illinois. We were there. We did. I was being trained as a company aid man, and then before we finished basic, a call came in, or a report that they wanted if anybody interested in wanting to extend the medical training, and I volunteered. I was interested in medicine and in medics rather, and I applied, and we wound up in Walter Reed General Hospital in Washington, D.C. And that was quite an incident, because that's where I eventually met my wife.
Now, how long was that training for?
Oh, at the Walter Reed General Hospital, we trained there 2 months, and then we went for another month down to Camp Lee, Virginia, and that was the end of that. So that was a basic medical training. That completed then I became a technician, a T5. T5 came later.
So you were considered at that point a medic?
Yeah, I was a medic. I went into it, yeah.
And then what happened?
Well, while I was training, I met my wife in D.C. She was working for the War Department, and we met on a cruise going up the Potomac that the Red Cross sponsored. And we corresponded after for a long time, and then I went overseas. Then she eventually became a WAC, you know. She's also an Army, and she wound up in Great Falls, Montana. Then when I came back from the war in June 46, we got together, and I asked if we wanted to get married. And she was then stationed in Great Falls, Montana. Matter of fact, I had some stories about this in a local paper. And she was in Great Falls, Montana, and I says, what do I need? And I wasn't a religious person. And she says, all you need is your baptismal papers, you know. So for three days from New York to Great Falls, Montana, you can appreciate it was 3 days in a coach car. And well, then, you know, GIs were used to riding around in boxcars, and I did that in France. So it wasn't too bad. So I wound up in Great Falls, Montana. We got married.
Well, tell me about when you were shipped overseas.
Oh, we landed in England, in a small town, Banbury. We set up a hospital then. In other words, we started from scratch. That was a 226 General we started, and then we were there for a short time. We went to Southampton, and then we went to Le Havre. Now this is after the invasion, after June. This maybe would be.
This was after D-Day?
Yeah, after D-Day. It would be October maybe. And we landed in Le Havre, was devastated. Well, you know, it took an awful beating. That's where the Germans were, and we weren't well accepted by the French people, because they blamed us for, you know, all the damage. But we tried to explain that the Germans held the grounds. So we landed in Le Havre and in Reims, and then we set up in. I should back up a little bit, because the Battle of the Bulge was going on in December 44 and then into January 45. And we eventually, from Reims, we went to set up a general in an old cavalry. The reason I know this, I've written about this, so it's not, so I'm familiar with it. And it was an old converted cavalry, and we set up a 226 General. That's where I got my stripes, Chief. Was it Cap Corporal? Was it B? What do you call it? 5? What the hell do they call it?
Tech 5?
Yeah, Tech 5. At Montmelon, and that was significant because we were receiving the wounded from the Battle of the Bulge, and that was I remember that. And I was in charge with the T5 of the stretcher bearers, and it was a tough time. We were getting the young fellas wounded, you know. And then we stayed there until the war ended. And then we were all set. We went down, we were going to go to Japan, and we went down to Marseille, ready to go to Japan, when the Japanese in August surrendered, in August of...
Let me back up a little
Go ahead.
bit to when you were in Europe. What were the conditions like at the field hospital? Were you operating out of tents, or
No, no, this was on a field, it was a general. Yeah. Well, did set up in tents at one time before we before we went to Momolan. We would set up, in other words, it was during the winter, I remember, where in tents, we were set up in tents for a while, but we didn't receive any wounded. I guess we were waiting for assignment. And it was a short period, I remember it was an apple orchard. I also remember that because of the French people involved were complaining about the damage we were doing to their, well, this is winter, and in the wintertime we were doing damage to their trees. And then that was the only time. We didn't actually receive any wounded. We weren't set up. We were in the preparation of moving to Momolan, getting ready for the wounded from the Battle of the Bulge.
That must have been horrific, some of the wounds those fellows suffered that you saw on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I was also in charge of the cardiac ward after with the T5, of course under the supervision of the head nurse, but I was in charge of the ward, and there was all kinds of cases we got, and so that went on until the war ended, and well, this is now talking about 45 now. The war ended, I think, in May, and the Germans surrendered in May 45.
What was that like when you heard that the Germans surrendered?
Well, it wasn't too much, well, we were glad, of course, but it wasn't too much of a relief because since we didn't have too much time overseas, we were scheduled to go to Japan, so the guys were saying, well, the war ended here, now we have to go to Japan, and I guess mixed feelings. We were glad and then sad that we had to, and then when the Japanese surrendered in August of 45, instead of going to Japan, we headed back to the States.
So basically, once the war ended with Germany, it was still business as usual. You tended,
Yeah, well, it's mostly routine stuff, after the war ended, and I guess they were getting ready to ship because, actually, we set up a general hospital. You remember, it takes in maybe 800 to 1,000 patients. And we started from scratch, and we had the colonel who was in charge. He, of course, he was a medic, as all of them are. But we started from scratch, and we had every conceivable department, medical department, and facilities, to handle that in a general hospital. See, unlike the field hospital or the first company aid, first aid, and so forth, this was a general hospital with all the equipment.
I see you were in until 1946.
Yeah, we discharged in June 46 in San Antonio. Okay. That's where my wife also was discharged.
Okay, so the war ended with Germany, and were you shipped back to the States before the war ended with Japan? Or
well, as I said, the war ended, and then we were shipped to Marseille, and when ready to go to Japan. And when the war ended in Japan, then we headed to the States. Okay. So that was about August, when Japan surrendered, because we were all set to go to Japan with our whole field, General Hospital, the 226 General.
Okay, that was August 1945. Then where did you go?
Well, we went back to the States, and then they went back to the States, and I landed in Texas, in Beaumont General, and that was a psychiatric department in Beaumont. Yeah, it was, and of course, we're talking about 45 now. The primitive methods they would use for GIs who were very violent and hostile. You want to go into detail or not?
Well, sure. If you're comfortable talking.
Well, I'll just take one where they would. One particular case that I know stands out. They would put them in a tub, and first of all, they would fill up the tub with very cold water, and they actually submerge him, not with his head, but they submerge him and keep him down there and hold him down there. The cold, I was told by the other medics that the cold was supposed to calm him or something. I couldn't get it. I didn't see the results. I couldn't substantiate it. But that was one method. And then the shock treatments was another thing that was awful in that particular. So those were the two to me, now looking back, were very primitive, but I guess they had nothing else to use, you know, to help the GIs. And at that time in Beaumont, I was living off the post. You were allowed to live off the post. So I was married then, and my wife was with me. And we lived in this nice place in El Paso. And we stayed, I remember paying $35. We paid $35 a month for the rent. And as I said, I know these figures because I've written about them, you know.
Now, was that considered, at the time, was $35 a month high rent?
Oh, sure. If we're talking about 45, 46, sure, 35. And I don't know what I was getting as a corporal. I don't know what pay. And I don't know what my wife, well, she was discharged, yeah, right. And she was pregnant, so we stayed there until the discharge. We discharged in San Antonio, and then we headed back to New York, and we stayed with my folks for a while. Now here was a complete change regarding her culture, because my wife came from a Yugoslav family, very subdued, very quiet, coming into an Italian culture where she thought people were screaming all the time, but that was not their natural pitch, you know. So I tried to explain, no, Mary, this is the way the Italians talk. My mother couldn't speak a couple of words in English, you know. All she remembered, that's it too much, and that's all. But she communicated with my wife for some way. My wife couldn't understand Italian, but they communicated with the sign languages, you know. And she got along very well with my mother, as I got along well with her folks, and they accepted me of another culture with open arms, to all the years that we were married, 45 until her folks died, you know. And
now, once you were discharged, you came back here.
Yeah.
What type of work did you do?
Well, I went under the GI Bill, of course. As I said earlier, I was interested in the theater, and I took a course in playwriting in Columbia for 6 months, and I was interested in not only acting but playwriting, but you know, in the arts you can't depend on that for a living, so I had to find work, and I got work in the field. My brother got me a job with his construction company that he was working for. And after then, I did that for a while, and then since I was still interested in medicine, I got a job with the Queen's General Hospital as what they called orderlies then, as an attendant. Then eventually I became a paramedic. I worked on an ambulance that I was familiar with doing first aid since I was in the Army, medics, about 5 years. And then, what was that? After that, 53 or so. 53, then, you know, you're married. And meanwhile, I'm trying to write, and then go to the theater. But if you're married, you can't do both.
Did you have any children at that point?
Yeah, I had one child, yeah, one son. And so I got then, I figured, you know, you want to have a steady income, so I applied for the test for the city in the maintenance department, and I worked there for Elmhurst First City Hospital on Welfare Island, then Elmhurst General in '56 when we actually opened this general hospital, lock, stock, and barrel. And I worked in the engineering department. We maintained the steam and air conditioning, and that was then I retired in 1978.
So you got out of the acting business then?
Well, yeah, but I never gave up writing. I had stuff published small in certain magazines and national magazines, but nothing elaborate, nothing great. But I'm still writing. I write for, we have 5 local regional newspapers in our neighborhood, in our Queens, and I write for them, freelancer, you know. And but the highest I was ever paid was $100. I mean, 2 stories. There are 2 stories. I got $100 for each one. So that's it. But I'm still, but never stopped being interested in literature, history. I always interested in American history, and then into music. I went. When I was 78, I said, "Well, I'm very tired now." And how much? We got much more time?
Oh, yeah.
I said, "What do we do now?" I says, "I'm 78, retired, and so you have a house, you have to maintain it, and so I figured." When I was a teenager, I played the guitar when I was about 14 or 13. So I figured, many years later, let me take up the guitar. I bought a guitar, took guitar lessons, then eventually graduated into keyboard, and then what they call a dinosaur musical instrument is the xylophone.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I always wanted to read music, study music, and I took a 6-month course, and I got interested in music, and I got a nice xylophone. So I play once in a while. So I stayed there with music, and write. And meanwhile, my wife, she does her thing. She's a nutritionist. Oh, I should have said to give her some credit.
You'll have to interview her.
Yeah. Well, I told her I was coming. I don't know whether she's not. I don't know whether she's bashful or what. But she was a coordinator for the at Elmer's General for the Dr. Ross who's still chief of medicine. She had a good position. She used to she had a position where she would assign doctors to various departments, and made the schedules for them. And she worked there. She retired. She worked at Elmer's after. No, I was working also for one time, but I came before her, and then I retired before she did in 78. And she retired, I think, in 83, 4 or 5 years later. And we live in Flushing, of course. We have a one-family house, and we're interested in gardening. We're organic gardeners, and whenever people mention gardening, I have to mention the fact that we're organic gardeners. That we don't believe in, pesticides and polluting the air and all that jazz.
Right.
So we take pride in that.
Do you have any grandchildren?
No, my son died in '66, and so we never had any more children. Or we have a lot of my nieces, grandnieces, and grandnephews, and my nephews and aunts, and nieces and nephews we have, and grandnieces and grandnephews. And I should mention one of my nephews is Al Buzio. He's one of the commissioners of the Department for Aging under Giuliani. So he finally, the last 8 years, that was his first politically assigned job. And he's been in politics. He was a president of the Republican Club for many years until he got this job. And he has a nice place in Hunter where we're going this weekend, Saturday. And one of the grandnieces is having a birthday party, Vanessa. She's going to be 12, and so we're going up there for a little while.
Do you keep in touch with fellow veterans?
That's a sad thing. For some reason we don't, but I belong to the 29ers. It's a quarterly magazine. It comes out of Virginia. And they keep us abreast of all the events for the GIs, And then I subscribe also to the American Legion, and then we have a few GIs in the neighborhood that we discuss, we talk about. But no, the guys in the Army, for a short time after the war, there was 2 fellas, and one in the Bronx. We corresponded for a while, then it kind of fizzled out, and no, we didn't have too close. Only the fellow in the Bronx that he happened to be in the same the 226 General, and we don't keep in touch. And it's a sad thing. I should have, but one of those things,
Now,
But
looking back on it all, are you proud of your service?
oh yeah, as coming from a small town, Long Island City, a small town then. We never left Long Island City. This was my first experience to travel, and it was an opening to see other parts of the country. That really, and the 2.5 years or 2 years and 3 months that I was in the Army, I didn't have no bad experiences that I can recollect. I mean, of course, other than treating the GIs, wounded GIs, but we were pretty fortunate, and the Army wasn't that bad, no. And I mean, nothing to talk about, you know, any unfavorable or anything terrible that I can recall. You know, just nothing bad that I can. I think
it was quite an experience for you.
Oh, to say the least. You know, I told you, my two brothers. I happened to, when I was in France, my brother was also in France, and we corresponded. And we were able to meet. He's dead now. He died.
Now, what did he do?
He was with the Air Corps, but he was a ground crew. Ground crew, and my other brother, Tony, he came in late. He was 38 years old when they drafted him.
38?
38.
Really?
And he was all set for the invasion on D-Day in June, when his back was severely wounded or something. He was bleeding profusely, and he was in infantry, you know, and he was all set to make that invasion, and no, he couldn't make it. He was pulled out and was sent to the hospital. But yes, he had two daughters, and they drafted him, and yeah, and outside of that, it's about the highlights, unless you.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to say? Anything that we may have missed you'd like to touch on?
Well, I'm more patriotic now than I was earlier, and when you're young, you don't realize, or you don't appreciate the things that you have until later on, when you can make an evaluation. And I feel more so that I'm more patriotic now. I'm more interested in American history and the background, and I feel that it's a shame sometimes that. As a matter of fact, I just wrote a little thing recently about America is not a violent nation, you know. I haven't had it published. I'm still sending it around. But I'm saying that we take these knocks all the time, you know. They don't highlight, sure, there are some lousy people out there and rotten people, but overall, it's not a bad, I think it's a wonderful country, not a bad, it's a wonderful country. And, comparing with others, and I don't mean you got to wave the flag every minute, you know, but I'm proud to be an American, proud to be here, and I also resent this hyphenation business. You know, I'm an Italian American, or I'm a Polish American. You're an American.
Right.
You're Italian descent secondary, but don't put a foreign country in front of your own country. You know, and that's about the story that I'm proud to tell and let others know about.
Well, it's been our pleasure. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much for having me here.